Thank you. Can you hear me now, John?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. I've just been apologising, but we were on mute, so you can see that technical problems are a little bit wider than I thought earlier. But nonetheless, I just wanted to thank you sincerely for allowing us to bring this forward and organising for your clients and observers to join us as well. So my apologies, sincere apologies. I'll now formally open.
No problem at all. No problem at all.
Thank you. I'll formally open the local planning panel meeting, and today we have gathered here as a panel to discuss the 4 development applications for advertising structures, infrastructures, development, and the panel, as I said, did undertake the inspections. We, like you, have had the opportunity of reading the council officer's report and the submissions, including the one you made yesterday, Mr. Wynne. I would just like to briefly say that this is a public meeting. It is recorded, and then the public would have access to it later on. I will introduce the panel very briefly, given the lateness of time. But first of all, I'd just like to introduce myself, Jan Morell. I'm the chair of the North Sydney Local Planning Panel, and I have some 40 years experience, although I don't always admit it. And I have operated in senior roles, and my last full-time position was as Commissioner of the Land and Environment Court. Thank you very much. I'll cross over to Tony Currow.
Thank you, Jan. My name is Tony Currow. I'm a Sydney-based architect and urban designer with developing significant experience in this design review and planning panel space.
Thank you. James.
James Harrison. I'm an urban and regional planner. I have over 40 years experience working in both local government and in planning consultancy.
You and Virginia.
Hello everyone, Virginia Waller. I'm an architect and the community representative on the panel. I've been on the panel since its inception, and I look forward to the meeting this afternoon.
Thank you. And I'll first of all also have to declare a conflict of interest myself with item number 1. It is a non-significant, non-pecuniary interest. I just happen to know one of the objectors rather remotely, but nonetheless it's appropriate that I step out for item number 1. And I will just confirm that the other panel members don't have any conflicts of interest.
No conflicts.
No conflicts from me, James Harrison.
And no other conflicts. I'll ask James Harrison to chair the meeting for the first item, and I'll step out. Thank you.
I'd just like to make it clear that Jan Morell has left the meeting room. Okay, the first item is 63, or land adjacent to 63 Willoughby Road, Crow's Nest. In respect of this application, there were 14 submissions, including submissions from the Lavender Bay Precinct Committee and the Woolston Craft Precinct Committee. And as Jan mentioned, there was then an additional submission from Mr. Wynne of Urbis on behalf of the applicant, which has been circulated to panel members. We have one speaker, that is Mr. Wynne. So I'm happy to hand over to you, John, if you want to address the panel members.
Yes, no, thank you very much for the opportunity to address. Just online with me so you know who's here. First of all, John Wynne, Director of Planning here at Urbis, so representing the applicant, which is JC Deco. I have online Cordelia Maxwell Williams, who is a Senior Development Manager at JC Deco. And I also have Jocelyn Morefoot, who is a Senior Executive at JC Deco as well. I'm proposing to just lead our submission to the panel on these matters. But both Cordelia, I would like her to be able to provide a short overview to the panel at an appropriate point, and Jocelyn's here if any other questions are required, but she's not seeking to address. So I'm conscious there's a few items to go through, but we don't intend to take a great deal of time. I suppose if I can start, I was hoping that the chair, Jan, was able to stay initially before going into item 1, but I'm happy to come back to that. I suppose where I'd like to start with this for the panel's view is you will have been fully briefed on this by the council. We understand that the council has prepared very extensive reports, so we know you're up to speed with what this is about. But from an applicant's point of view, the starting point for us is that what's before you today is the first of a series of tranches of applications that we are submitting through North Sydney Council. These applications are the approvals that are required as part of a contractual arrangement that has been entered into between JC and North Sydney Council in response to a council tender for a upgrade of its street furniture throughout the municipal area. So this occurred some years ago where council identified a desire for upgrading of street furniture assets, which include things such as bus shelters, telephone booths, other facilities, as well as the introduction of communication signage, both providing communications relating to council and community and public issues, but with all of those underpinned by a relationship for some third-party advertising signage. So that was a contract that was went out, and JC Deco was successful in being appointed to that effectively as a partner in delivering these with North Sydney Council. Now, both Cordelia and Jocelyn can talk to those details at much greater depth, but I think the key first point I want to make is that what's before you today is the first four of many applications that we are working through with council in a series of tranches. So that's the first. So this is the first off the rank. I'd say also that obviously there is we respect and we understand council has to adhere to a very, very appropriate process of managing these development applications on their own merits without any regard to the commercial contracts that are entered into. We're aware that the planning staff have been very diligent and thorough in assessing those. Having said that, this is the first, when we received the recommendations that we saw when they were posted last week, that was the first we really had seen from council with regard to the response to the applications we provided. So they have raised some issues that we want to talk about today that we think are relevant to not only all four applications, but also the future applications that are in the system as well, because the intention here from our point of view is to be putting in development applications that are aligned with the expectations of the council and the community, and are reflecting and delivering on what the council contract is all about. This is not a third party coming in and just proposing their ideas on the council. This has been developed in response to what the council has identified as an important part of its city planning efforts. So that's the first comment, and that's why I'd had hoped that Jan could be available just to understand that context, but I'm sure that is appreciated. So if we go specifically to the applications before you today, there's one recommended for a refusal, which is the Crow's Nest one, which is the one we're talking about now, and there's the 3 recommended for approval with conditions. We'll start obviously with item 1, which is the Crow's Nest one. We understand the council assessment and concern, and we share that concern about the appropriateness of the siting of these structures. A really comprehensive process is undertaken when selecting sites and trying to site them to ensure that there's a balance between respecting heritage items, residential properties or other sensitive receivers, ensuring there's traffic and pedestrian safety and so forth. So it's a complicated matrix of considerations that go into the site selections. And by and large, we endeavour to satisfy all specified requirements and then broader considerations of character and appropriateness in the local settings. So the site that in Crow's Nest, we're really disappointed, to be frank, with the assessment, and not so much the recommendation for refusal, although we would like to argue against that. But we think that the commentary by the council's heritage officer within this assessment report, we think is really misleading and really doesn't present an appropriate characterisation or assessment of the application. So as you know, there's really fundamentally two grounds that are raising serious concerns about this sign. One is about the heritage and its impact on the heritage item and the character of the area, and the second is about sightline impacts. The sightline impact one, we identified that ourselves in the application. Our own traffic report identified that there was a potential, just given the configuration of the road pavements around there, that there could be some interruption to pedestrian sightlines and crossing Willoughby Road at that point. And it actually recommended that we consider some alternate locations for that. Now, the reason we didn't act on that was because we're very conscious of the heritage issue as well, and we're trying to seek the right balance of where this sign should be in the balance of considerations. We are able, on the sightline issue, to have flexibility in the location of that structure, and that's the same with all the structures. They all can move within a certain range to ensure we get the best possible outcome. So we are able to move that to relieve entirely the pedestrian sightline issue. That can be overcome with a relocation, and we would like, we've got diagrams that show that. The bigger issue, though, is that the heritage comment by the council's heritage officer really, I think, paints a very unfortunate picture of what these structures are all about. And page 10, as highlighted in my submission, I think really makes some comments that really, in my opinion, overreach what is required and appropriate for an officer assessing the matter on a heritage grounds. To talk about these signs promoting products that are of transient nature and which are very antithesis of what heritage is all about is just a total misrepresentation of these proposals. The panel will be aware that these sort of structures are erected regularly in urban centres throughout Australia and overseas. JCDecaux is an international firm and it works with councils in all jurisdictions. And it is quite common to find structures such as this, which are having public messaging facilities on them, as well as advertising in some of the most sensitive urban locations and in heritage locations. I think to create the impression that an advertising sign is a significant enough impact to cause this to be refused, I think is, in my opinion, an overreach on that officer's assessment. We've put in extensive heritage impact assessments that have looked at the relationship to the heritage item and which conclude that there is no unacceptable negative impacts. And we understand that council officers can take a different view on that, but we think that the way that has been presented in this report is really unfortunate. And it's disturbing because we think it paints a picture of this particular sign in this particular location that is not accurate. So on the first application recommended for refusal, we think that both those matters, being the heritage issue and the sightline issues, can be overcome with some refinement of the location of the sign and some better understanding and assessment of the heritage issue. So we would prefer, if it were possible, for this not to be refused and for the application to be deferred to enable us to present to the council a potential alternate location where that can be provided while minimising pedestrian impacts. And we'd also like the opportunity to have a further discussion with council about that heritage assessment to ensure that it's more balanced and reflective of what's being proposed. So our submission to the panel on that item is that we think it's unreasonable to refuse it on the grounds that have been presented to you. We would seek for it to be deferred as a minimum to enable us to have some further engagement with council. That doesn't need to take a long amount of time. Council may disagree with it at the end of the day. That's okay, but we would just rather, given this is the first cab off the rank in the sense of these applications, to make sure that all parties had the opportunity to optimise the outcome. So that's our first submission there.
Thank
John, at that point, might it be appropriate for us to focus on that application, because you might want Jan back into here in respect of the other 3 applications, what you might want to say to those applications?
Yes, please.
Okay. Panel members, do you have any questions of John? Tony?
Well, I do. I do. Thanks, James.
Sorry, just before I go there, and sorry, is it Mr. Caro? I can't see. I can only see the back.
Right.
I can. You're distant. I can see your head, the back of your head, more clearly than the front of your.
I can see it too.
I suppose I'm happy to go there. I just thought I might invite Cordelia
first.
or Cordelia.
I was proposing for us to just question you on the
fine.
of 63 and not deal with more general issues.
Okay, fine. Okay, let's do that then.
Say about just the pedestrian safety issue, the heritage issue.
Okay.
Anything that's specific to this application, and then we can call Jan back in to deal with the other 3 applications.
Okay.
Yeah, John, I'd just like to briefly just say that I think, speaking for myself and probably my fellow panel members, is that I think we all accept the principles and ultimately the value of well-designed public domain furniture. And I think that the kind of the problem here is that from our side, we've been presented with 4 kind of items which are all purely advertising, and clearly the way you've described this is part of a wider suite that we're all familiar with in many cities around the world, where there's public benefit by advertising being associated with a bus stop or a flower store or whatever. So I guess in that context, it would have been good to have seen how this fits in, and more importantly, a program about when, I'm kind of interested in why the advertising and solely the advertising is happening first, rather than a kind of a more integrated development of it with other elements of the suite that do provide some public benefit. Why is it happening up front like this, the advertising only?
Well, I suppose just to be clear, the applications are for what we describe as communication structures. They have 2 sides, one of which is devoted to public and council communication, and the other which is third party. Now that's described in the applications and in the council report. These are
on a size basis. There's a weighting towards the third party component in terms of its exposure and size.
Sure. But what it does reflect, I suppose, is the point, is that the communication structures are part of the council suite of assets that they're looking for, and are part of the, in a digital sense, a part of the modern city.
We accept that, and we accept
clearly, we would be more than happy if the panel found it useful. If you're going to be seeing multiple applications coming before you in coming periods, which is the case, we'd be more than happy as an applicant to provide the panel with a briefing of the holistic view of how these are being processed and in what order.
I think that would be a very good idea. Yeah. Sorry, I just think that would be a very good idea, because in a way we're being asked to assess something with blinkers on, and what you're proposing is a kind of a master plan that says this is our kind of philosophical approach, and how all the pieces fit together would provide a very helpful context going forward in this assessment. So by other panel members into the future.
Look, I totally agree. We would welcome that. I suppose it goes back to the point that, given this is a partnership with North Sydney Council, we understand North Sydney Council has got to be very arm's length, and very, very, very procedurally driven around how they've managed this. But and we totally respect that. But we feel that there is a important context and narrative and understanding of what this project is all about, what the genesis of it, because it goes to not just the specific issue we're looking at on this sign, it goes also then to the conditions that are being put on the recommended for the other signs. So we would welcome that. And in fact, we would prefer the 4 applications to be deferred, to enable us to brief the panel if necessary, if that was valuable on the whole overall picture. That'll provide a much clearer context for the approach that is being taken, what's gone into informing it, the design processes and so forth. And then it'll be a better foundation, we think, to make decisions around conditions or grounds of refusal.
I've just got one very brief second question. Given the issues council's raised to do with safety and heritage, are there other locations along Willoughby Road where you could install this that have less impact in that area?
There probably are. Yes, the answer would be there would be. There is a degree of flexibility in the location of these structures, and again, my clients from JC&Co can talk to that more thoroughly or more fully. But in my experience, yes, there is flexibility.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
No further questions, Tony?
John, hi, Virginia Waller. I just wanted to, I think as a panel, we recognise the DCP don't want these signs in residential areas. That was one of the mandates. But, as a town centre, they're appropriate. But given the thoroughfare, this is for 63 Willoughby Road, given Willoughby Road is a particularly busy thoroughfare, it's two-way traffic. It really was that safety concern with the signage there. And as you said, you prefer to defer and maybe workshop where in the town centre, it may be more appropriate to have that sign, which is sort of, I think, a reasonable and probably good outcome.
Yes, Virginia, look, we totally agree, that these sort of structures are better in some locations than others. There's no doubt about that. And site selection, and it's really important to ensuring you get the right outcome in the right place. There's some locations the JC&Co in their own right would simply rule out because of a whole range of public or commercial considerations, or environmental issues and trees or whatever it might be. So it is a comprehensive process, but it's one that we think that we would be, we're open to. It's one that they want to get the right outcome on. They're not trying to steamroll sort of through their own sites here. These are sites that we're endeavouring to work with council on, that they're comfortable with. That's why, we think there's a benefit in deferring to enable us at least to have the conversation with council under the guidance of the panel. And we understand, it's still in the panel's process, but it doesn't need to take a long time. But I think it would be beneficial to then get some greater clarity around the approach we're taking in these and future applications.
No further questions, mate.
Just a couple of quick questions from me, John. Obviously, your own traffic consultant recommended relocating the sign. Was there any reason why that suggestion wasn't taken up and the application amended?
No, it's a good point, and we recognise that. They suggested it be moved, I think, 2.5 metres away from the curb to relieve that site issue. Under discussion with the consultant about that, and then having regard to their heritage and the broader consideration of, well, how does that then affect the footpath? Because there's a blister there, I think, is the issue. There's a blister in the footpath that goes out, and the view is if the sign's in the blister, then it's where people stepping off because they see it as a pseudo sort of crossing point, that you'd be better to pull it back. Now, when we looked at that originally, we thought, well, really, is it that big a issue? It's a low speed environment. It's people crossing all parts of Willoughby Road in that area. I think we all know that spot really well. It's a great, vibrant spot. It seemed to us on the balance of issues that wasn't the biggest issue, and so we retained it there. But the answer is we can move it, but then we'd need to factor in other issues, and the heritage is obviously a relevant one, but as is then other aspects of the pedestrian arrangement and the plaza arrangement there. So something in an ideal situation, we'd be more collaboratively working with council about identifying that location. But as an applicant, we've got to put our our best foot forward and then respond. So we recognise that we thought on balance it wasn't significant enough to shift it to another location that caused other issues. But and it may be we can't shift it to a location that everyone's happy with, is the reality. But I think there's merit in endeavouring to do that and at least exhausting that process.
Okay, my last question was really around what you perceive the established character of Ernest Place to be, because it seems that the council's assessment, heritage assessment, ultimately concludes that a freestanding advertising structure is out of character with the established character of Ernest Place. So what do you think that character is in Ernest Place?
Well, I'm a planner, not an urban designer, but from a planning point of view, I think it's a really it's a really important public space. It's a vibrant location where we have activation around it for food and retail outlets, a lovely area of public open space, some civic facilities, and I think a church, which is the heritage item, and then you have the frontage to Willoughby Road, which is the Eat Street location, very vibrant and buzzy. So it's a lovely space. I think it plays an important role. It's got established vegetation in there. It's a really critical part of the town centre. Having said that, where the sign is proposed is part of the road environment. There's an established pattern of structures up and down Willoughby Road, both dining areas that extend out into the road pavement. The road's been narrowed, as you'd probably understand, to slow down traffic, vehicle traffic, and facilitate pedestrian activity. So there's a series of structures and elements in the street. It's got an attractive, vibrant sort of appeal to it. And it's while it's quite a diverse built form along the street, it's got a nice pedestrian scale to it. So it's while it's all those attributes, it's similar to many other public spaces that we find, and where similar proposals and assets are established throughout Sydney, all parts of Sydney, in all council areas. Similar applications are being approved with similar facilities in similar locations. So we think it's a contributor, a positive contributor to that environment. We don't think it creates any disharmony. We think it's part of the vibrancy of the Willoughby Road character, and we think it's designed in a manner that doesn't create offence or impact or negativity, we think, on Ernest Place itself.
All right, thank you, John. I don't know whether Jocelyn or Cordelia want to add anything, but if not, I would propose that we invite Jan Morrell back in and deal with the other three applications.
I just had one more comment.
Virginia.
Sorry, just thinking out loud. I understand that you have John, you mentioned a site selection. You have the criteria of it meets traffic, it meets
yes.
Heritage, the urban considerations of the area.
Yes.
But given this particular site, 63 near the church, they have opened up. There's a new site link, and I wonder in this instance maybe that's the site link through to
the new station. Yeah, the new station link. Yeah, it's a great link, and it's a great.
That if this application is deferred, that could be a talking point. And
yeah, Virginia, look, the streetscape is changing. There's lots happening now around the metro and other major developments. So it's evolving, which is really exciting. And I think JC Deco's intention here is to be contributing positively to that. And if that means reconsidering the location of it, they will be 100% supportive in that and would like that opportunity. But And I stress, you may ask, well, why can't we do this before we lodge the applications? Well, because of the probity issues, we need to be quite arm's length with council, and we have to start from an applicant's point of view. But at this point we're at, I think this application and others would benefit from the ability in a controlled, appropriate environment under the panel's guidance to have the opportunity just to review. And this one specifically, I think, would benefit from that.
Sorry, no more questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll invite Jan to come back in and hear about the other 3 applications.
Thank you, James. Very well, we'll move on to the second item. And the second item is the advertising structure, community information at 79 to 81 Berry Street, North Sydney. So do you have any comments on the report that you wish to make, John, or any conditions that you wish to address?
Thank you, Chair. Our submission really relates to the three applications. I know you have to assess them individually, but I'll talk to them collectively. As I said earlier, with regard, I think Council's done an extremely thorough job. We have no criticism of the assessments of these applications. They don't include the similar sort of language that was used in the Heritage Officer's report, which I've highlighted on the previous application, which I think was unfortunate. But I think these applications are very comprehensive and I think balanced. And I think from the assessment of the merits of the application, we think they are accurate. And we support the recommendations in those applications, subject to one principal issue. There's probably 2 issues, and Chair, you've missed this conversation related to the previous application. We don't need to go into the details of it, but again, these applications are being advanced, reflecting a desire from council for the creation of these form of assets in the urban areas, because they serve 2 functions. They provide communication opportunities for the public, and that's supported by advertising. So and these are part of a broader tranche of applications that are coming in regarding bus shelters, telephone boxes, and other street furniture assets. So it's the beginning of a series of applications. The issues that are raised in this particular DA and the 3 DAs is really the condition relating to the time duration of consent.
Yep.
And then we've raised that in our submission. So we're fully aware, as I'm sure the panel is and council is, that under the SEP, which is I keep forgetting the new SEP name, the SEP Industry and Employment, which covers signage. That SEP establishes a 15-year time duration for advertisements. Now that the SEP recognises that there can be a lesser time period imposed where council has a policy to that effect, and we're aware that council has a DCP that specifies a 3-year time limit. So the recommendation for the 3-year time limit, we understand where that comes from. We don't agree with it, but we understand the basis of it. The submission we want to make on this point, and this goes back to stepping back a little bit, we think, in the sense of the JC contract with North Sydney Council, is that there's a significant investment cost that goes into upgrading street furniture, and one of the reasons councils enters into these formal contracts with advertising on it is because that's the source of funding these costs. These are expensive assets, and you think about all of them, bus shelters and telephone boxes, and all upgraded to contemporary standards, high designs. They are very expensive items, and it's fundamentally paid for by the commercial arrangements that are entered into. That's a standard operating procedure, if you like, throughout Australia with many local governments. And again, Jocelyn and Cordelia can give you more details about how that works, but that's the fact of the matter. So in the context where this is a partnership and an arrangement in delivering assets that council's seeking to have, we think that the 3-year time limit that applies broadly across the DCP is too restrictive. It's restricted to the point that it could make, you know, the viability, the commercial viability of these, so it would make these commercially unviable. But again, I'll let JC talk to that. What we propose is that you know, it's a huge gap between 3 years and 15 years in the sense of the council DCP, and that we think there is a circumstance here that warrants something that's a bit more recognises a bit more of the public nature of these assets. So we've proposed, you know, a 7-year time frame. I'll be honest, there is not a lot of science to that number. There's not a lot of science to that number. But we recognise that council wants to have a control, if you like, on the duration of signage, so that they can reassess things as the local environment changes and planning controls change, community attitudes change. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why there's time duration limits on consents, is that, well, if the planning controls change, we might not want these anymore. We want different things. So we understand the planning intent behind that, but we think that 3 years is, you know, it takes us nearly a year to get a DA, and then to think, you know, you've got a 3-year time limit. You know, in other circumstances, as you would all know, panel members, that, you know, you might get a time trial of a certain time period before it ticks over and says you can go permanent. You know, that's not appropriate in this situation, but we think the condition here that requires the applicant to lodge a fresh development application before the cessation of 3 years is just too onerous. And we think there's two solutions to that. One is we have a more reasonable time frame that is balanced up with the cost and the commercial aspects of that, and that then requires a broader understanding of the arrangement between JCDecaux and the council. Or there's an alteration to the recommendation that refers to, you know, more of a modification process or an extension process as opposed to a fresh DA. You still have a time limit on it, but say, well, okay, maybe it's 3 years. You can have a 3 years subject to a review at that point. But the blanket 3-year time limit we just think is too blunt and too restrictive. So we've put forward that we think, you know, the easiest solution to that is a longer time frame, but there are other solutions to that. It goes back to our point that we think this is of such importance, this matter, that again, we would ask these 3 matters be deferred so that we can have a conversation with council about that.
What the matters be deferred is, did you say?
Yes, so we've asked for the first application. We think all 4 applications should be deferred to enable us to have discussions that we haven't been able to have for probity reasons and understandable probity reasons with the council officers about the conditions on the duration and you know, to deal with ideally the locational issue on item 1. So we would prefer to see this deferred to enable under the guidance of the panel a discussion with council around that time limit, because as I say, it's the first of multiple applications that are coming through, and frankly, I think if the 3-year time limit is imposed, I think it may well undermine the whole commercial aspect of the project. So at that point, I might invite Cordelia just to fill you in a little bit more about the commercial aspects. Are you there, Cordelia?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, John, and apologies, panel members. My camera is not working at the moment. I will just echo sort of everything that John has just said about the preference for it not to lapse, the consent not to lapse after 3 years for the 3 panels in discussion right now. So basically, the term that is set out in the agreement with JCDecaux and North Sydney Council, which was based off the tender, is 10 years. And so that was sort of what all of our business case and modelling was sort of done on. And you know, the capital expenditure of these sort of assets is somewhere in the realm of $150,000 to $200,000 for the 3 assets. And you know, if they were to be decommissioned after just 3 years, it undermines them, and just that they've just become commercially unviable, and therefore we unlikely would be able to build those, because the generation of revenue would not occur in the way that we need it to. So that's just what I'd say there. Obviously, that's more of a commercial sort of input from my end, but just so that you have some more context as to why 7 years would be more appropriate.
So
Thanks,
10 years
Cordelia.
is what you're saying, because that then corresponds with the agreement with council. Can I just?
Sorry.
No, well, I've heard from Cordelia it's 10, and I've heard from John 7. So I just need to we do need to clarify that. Thank you very much.
That's fine. The agreement is for 10 years with council, between JCDecaux and council. John has suggested a period of 7, purely because it's somewhere in between the SEP guideline of 15 and the DCP control of 3. So that's sort of where those two numbers differ. Obviously, we would prefer 10, and we would take 10 if we could, but we've put forward 7 as a compromise.
Okay, so I mean, the thing is, you could put in a modification application to change the 3 years. So just let me finish. So, I mean, I can't speak for the panel yet, but I'm just thinking aloud here. But the 3, say for example, if the given the circumstances of the contract being 10 years, say for example, you had a 5-year period, and I haven't discussed this with the panel, but if you had a 5-year period, then that would just need to be modified to allow, you know, your 10-year duration, and which is a pretty long time frame as well. Plus, the reason why I understand that there is a 3-year recommended is because this is a new form of infrastructure in the community, and it would allow it to be assessed. Now, the other thing that has come to mind is that if, for example, 5 years, which would then require a modification, but in the event that any of the structures prohibited pedestrian flows or became a traffic hazard, then there could be an ability for then that signage to be located. I'm just thinking aloud here, and it's very difficult because it is, you know, constrained by the EP&A Act. But I'm just trying to see how we could have a provision, if we did allow a longer period, which would, in the event that certain signage infrastructure was prohibiting pedestrian movements or became a traffic hazard, then it would be moved. Now, I don't know whether you have anything in your contract with the North Sydney Council to that effect, but I'm just trying to think aloud and a way to resolve this issue.
Thank you. I think, you know, I think it's got merit, that proposal. What I'd say, first of all, it's not really a new thing. North Sydney Council has a long history of partnerships with media companies, and it may be JCDecaux. Again, Cordelia could confirm that. But you will, if you know the local area, a lot of the bus stops already have integrated with. They have integrated with them. They have signage integrated with the bus stops.
Yes. Now, can I just say, but these particular signs are new to my mind. I do understand the relationship between street infrastructure and signage and bus. I've done a lot of these, but at the same time, this particular feature or functional advertising structure that's before us is quite, I mean, I know it's all over Sydney now, but it is a new thing in terms of the community.
Well, it may be, you may be right on that point in the sense of the communication structure itself. It is, as you understand, a part of the package of the street furniture.
I do understand that.
Assets that council proposed. But look, I think your point about the condition, there's a range of ways we can discuss that, and we would like the opportunity to discuss that. You know, we think there's a number of ways. Obviously, if you prove today with the 3 years, we would have, you know, no alternate, but to think about a modification. But that just gets us all back into another planning process, and we'll be back here. Ideally, we would love to have the opportunity under the panel's guidance with the council now about a condition that can meet the needs of both sides to ensure that there is necessary control, but also the surety for the applicant that enables these delivers and the next assets that are coming through, because there will be bus stops before you shortly with the same thing, and if 3 years on it, it's simply not going to. It's even less feasible because they are very expensive pieces of infrastructure. So,
can I just before you go on there, John, can I just say that I personally, once again speaking not on behalf of the panel, but I don't have a problem with advertising on bus stops. But these are a freestanding advertising structure with community information. I do understand that,
yeah,
but
yes,
it's very different from assessing
sure.
or determining an application, and I wouldn't even have any qualms about that on bus stops structures themselves.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that, because that might make our future applications more straightforward. But look, I think the point is, regardless of the asset, there's a need to, because the 3 years is a standard DCP provision, and council, I would expect, is going to be saying, well, it's 3 years on all the applications. So we have to deal with the condition issue now.
Well, I would like to try and deal with it within this forum.
Yeah.
As far as possible.
Well, we're happy to do that either today or to adjourn or defer or whatever and come back to it. And we put one solution through as extra time. There could be alternate solutions. And again, we would prefer to be dealing with in collaboration with the council officers. So we're open to how this is handled, Chair.
Very well. Now, I think that the rest of the panel, I don't know how far and I should have thought and put this agenda, the first agenda item last, because I know that many of the issues relate to the whole of the package. So I don't know how far the discussions went previously, but can I invite other panel members to ask questions? Tony?
Yes, look, just to apprise you of that, Madam Chair, we did discuss the value of the proponent preparing a broader strategic document that explained these standalone advertising signs, which we're seeing first up in the context of the whole package, and about where the likely locus of location is, which would be in commercial centres rather than residential focus, and so that we got an understanding of how the advertising fitted in and how the kind of broader public benefit of the whole offer has kind of been constructed. And going forward with a suite of tranches, as John's described it, of these packages, it's a kind of a mud map, if you like, which will greatly assist. We think former future panels in understanding the context of what we're looking at in isolation at the moment, which is 4 standalone advertising signs, and we don't understand the time frame of how that's going to happen as well. Will they be there for 6 months or 3 years? All of those things were discussed while you were out of the room, and I think it's important that you are brought up to date with that.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Okay. I mean, we are charged with making determinations, and I'm just trying to understand. These 4 signs are each in commercial areas, and I'm just trying to understand why we would need to await a guideline or a suite of packages telling us how many there's going to be or whatever else. I don't know what we've got in mind in terms of understanding what the package might look like.
I think from our point of view, it would be just to provide a broader context to the panel to understand the objectives of the contract that JCD is pursuing as expressed in the council contract, to understand the methodology that's gone into defining the assets and the design of those assets, and then the methodology that's gone into the site selection, the the recognition that there is flexibility around the location of signs, that they can be there, you know, with having regard to all the range of criteria, which JCD does as a very professional group, that there's a range of criteria that's balanced up to determine the optimum sites for these locations. And many sites are dismissed outright for a whole range of reasons. And so what is presented then is sites that we think are appropriate, but we understand there can be other issues that are identified by other parties that may be able to be resolved. And that's why we say with item 1, we think we can resolve that through a relocation or potentially a relocation. It may not be able to satisfy everyone, but we think we could try. And the same with the consent conditions. So we think there's a value in the holistic sort of understanding of the trenches, the nature of them, and particularly with regard to the time duration, how that could be managed. But equally, Chair, we'd accept your view that, you know, you've got 4 applications in front of you, and you can be determined. And
well, I mean, yeah,
that's
you could withdraw the applications, I suppose, but
well,
a long way down the track. But
yeah.
I mean,
could I just sorry jump in there as well? Really from JCDCO, just to let you know that we have already lodged all the development applications that we want to lodge with council. It's just that these 4 in particular have been the first to be referred to the panel. I'm not too sure why, but you know, council are fully aware of the context of all of the signs that we've lodged.
So that would be your total package for the LGA.
Correct. Yeah. So there's been 13 development applications lodged for communication panels and 13 for bus shelters. Okay.
And so there's 13 in these. Are these inclusive of the 4 today? The 13?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so you're planning on putting a package together for the whole lot so that people can then be assured that there wouldn't be a proliferation of these in the LGA because we're having 13.
Yeah, that's right. You know, that's
exactly right. Sorry?
That's exactly right. It's to understand
exactly right. Okay.
more for the panel. Council officers, I think, would understand the situation. Community probably doesn't. But I think it's important the panel understands, you know, why these are coming form in this form.
Okay. I can see merit in that because I was of the understanding that it could be an ongoing drip of development applications for the signs, but if it's going to be limited to 13, then that clearly is something that is in the interests of the community understanding as well. So I'm being persuaded that this may have merit. I'd also like it to be a 2-way communication street in that there are a number of things the panel has discussed today with the council staff about issues that should be incorporated into guidelines, which would then guide your future applications.
Sure.
So then council would have a set of guidelines, which whether it becomes a DCP long-term or whatever, but council would have a number of criteria that they would like your signs to meet. So it needs to be a 2-way conversation as opposed to just 1 way.
Well, that's perfect. As from our point of view, we would much rather be working in that form of arrangement rather than arm's length applicant response, which is not a criticism of council or anyone. It's just the way we have to operate given the commercial sensitivities around these type of applications.
So you're actually saying to me, and I just want to cut to the chase, that rather than, and I wasn't privy to the first one, so I won't even comment on that, but the 3 that I am in on, you would rather no determination be made today and that they be deferred. They are recommended for approval, but you would rather they be deferred.
We'd rather all 4 applications be deferred.
Yes.
To enable the broader discussion, and then we, under the guidance of the panel, as a 2-way conversation, and then we have at least given every application and the panel every opportunity to be understood in its full context.
Yeah. Okay then. Well, as I said, I can't say what the panel's decision will be, but it'll be available on the website in the next by Friday, close of business. I will just see whether any of the other panel members have some questions. We did have some concerns. One in particular was in terms of the width of a footpath, they should be placed on footpaths that are wider, so that so that the sign would not take up, say, more than 1/4 of the width of the footpath in terms of pedestrian flows, etc. Whether that be precisely 1/3 or 1/4, I don't know at this point in time, but they're the sorts of issues that would also need to be looked at. And where there are traffic management, local traffic management provisions on streets, clearly that is for local traffic as opposed to putting advertising. So they're just a couple of things off the top of my head, but I think some of the other panel members have some questions. James?
It's just a question about the size of the community signage, which has an area which is about 1/6 the size of the general advertising. Is there a reason why the community advert size is so small? Could it not be the same size as the panel on the other side?
I can't answer that, I'm afraid.
I can speak to that. So it's an interactive panel whereby members of the public can check information about local place of interest, the weather, the time, etc. So if it were to be the same size as the advertising panel, it doesn't become possible to interact with that human scale.
I mean, there's no technical reason why it couldn't be bigger.
I would have to look into that, but I believe it's a sort of a standard format and size of those panels.
Can I just refer you to, for example, the Find Your Store at Westfields? They're certainly not very small, they're much larger. I realise you'd need things at a certain eye level or whatever, but I would have thought that you could have enlarged them without interfering with the purpose of them.
My last question was the 13 freestanding signs that you're proposing, is that a limit that's in your contract, or is that just JC&Co's position today?
It's JC&Co's position right now, purely because it was a much larger list that we had with North Sydney Council to begin with, but we went through a very rigorous site selection and brought it down to just 13.
Okay, thank you.
If I could,
yes, Jocelyn.
sorry, if I could just jump in on that, the community screen size on the other side, if I could just jump in on that and just make comment that it's also the design in which council's own commercial team have requested and accepted in us putting forward their design. So it's being stipulated as part of the contract as the design that they preferred, and that it's not the only public benefit, as Cordelia and John have both touched on. There is also the revenue streams generated by advertising that are connected to council that also give council and the community a greater benefit. So appreciate that it is quite a difference in size from the actual advertising display itself, but in total, it was what was accepted and requested by North Sydney Council as part of the tender.
As the actual size, because it seems very small. Very small. I mean, like the size of an A4 sheet of paper. Is that about the size it is?
I believe it's 32 inches, so yes, not dissimilar.
Yep, okay. Virginia.
Yes, Jan. Just going back, notwithstanding what we've said currently about this application may be deferred, on item 3, which is the Military Road application, we were conscious of each situation, you know, the footpath varies in size, and we were conscious, getting back to Jan's issue or comment, whether the sign should be 1/3 of the footpath. That was really driven by accessibility if you had 2 wheelchairs passing. So one of the things we were sort of mentioned, is it possible that the sign could be at a 45-degree angle rather than, you know, perpendicular to the road, and you wouldn't want it parallel to the road because that would, well, if it was parallel.
It's I suppose anything's possible, but it's highly unusual to see anything other than being perpendicular, and that's for a range of reasons. But it's something that, you know, that location I think is recommended for a minor shift of the sign to reflect trees and so forth. So in the final selection of where it would go, you know, we can have a look at, you know, the other aspects of that. But I don't know that a 45-degree is a solution, but, you know, it's certainly something that we can look at as we finalise, you know, the final details of the sign.
I guess if you do a master plan document, you sort of put up controls and they're sort of standard, but I guess in this situation,
Yeah,
each site does have its own peculiarities, and you have to be sort of site specific. So
yeah,
I'm aware
no,
that
it's true. You're right, but equally, you know, the sort of as public infrastructure, you know, which are built on a multiple scale, there's only so much variation that can be built into the actual assets themselves in reality. Yeah.
Do you mean by that, John, say varying the width? If you were building on a standard 3.6 footpath and the wisdom was that a third was the maximum, say, well, you comply with that, don't you, at 1.2?
Oh yeah, well, they all comply with all necessary standards.
In the end, it becomes a question of how busy the footpath is, quite frankly. So
it does, yeah.
Willoughby Road, it might be very different to, you know, Miller Street. So.
Yeah, but and again, that's exactly right. And as you understand, the structures themselves, whether they're these comms panels or bus shelters, they're all standard construction style. They're not unique to each location. So it is about getting the site selection right, as Cordelia said before. We really have to work to make sure we satisfy all those requirements to ensure that that site is appropriate. And we rule out many sites.
And just one other comment: is it possible for the community content to be shared on the A side for a certain percentage of the time?
Yes.
Because
and it's very much standard practice to do that.
I believe that's already stipulated in the contract, but we can come back and confirm as required.
Okay, then. Very good. And there are, even when we looked at the one in Miller Street, Camaret, you have to have regard to quite precisely positioning, having regard to the shop front of the pharmacy, trying to line up with the edge of the window as opposed to being in the middle, or lining up in terms of other advertising that may be around, keeping it out of the laneway itself, keeping it away from the tree. So the nuances of every single one must be really carefully considered.
Yeah, agree. Totally agree.
Any other questions from anybody? No? Very well. We will be making a decision this afternoon, a determination or a decision of, and we hear your request for a deferral. I'm certainly thinking that there may be merit in that. Obviously, I have to confer with my other panel members, but you can be assured that we will be trying to work with you. So thank you all for attending, and thank you for the time change. I do appreciate it. And it gives us more time to consider this matter as well. So thank you very much.
And can I say on behalf of the team, thank you very much. It's been good to be able to have such an open and constructive conversation. We really appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That closes the public meeting at 2:25 past 2. Thank you all very much. Okay. Right.